Hey guys, it's me Astrid, and today we're going to talk about Masdevallia culture. I want to present this to you guys with the caveat that I do not know how to grow Masdevallias. These are the first two Masdevallias that have ever entered my home. Okay, they were given to me and every member of our Orchid Society last night for free as a gift for being a member, and they gave us a roundtable talk about Masdevallia and a little bit of Dracula orchid care. And so I'm presenting this video to you because I want to reiterate the things that I heard that I thought were interesting, that I didn't know, and so that you guys can hear what I heard basically based on the notes I've taken, which I think I take pretty damn good notes. Also, I want to say thanks Portland Orchid Society for the Masdevallias. This is definitely something I wouldn't have tried on my own for a really long time unless you guys gave these to me. Also, I want to say, hey everybody, apparently all of you know about my YouTube channel now. I've been sniffed out. And I just wanted to say, thanks for watching my videos, everyone in the POS, Portland Orchid Society. You guys are a great bunch, and I always have fun with you. And I'm not even being nice because I got caught. I'm being nice because I like you. All right, so let's get on to the Masdevallia care, though. And it's like Masdevallia, Masdevallia. I don't know the correct exact pronunciation, so I'm probably going to switch around a lot. And again, these are my notes based on what our Orchid Society member Terry told us. And Terry grows fabulous species orchids. Like, just the weirder it is, the more he probably grows it. It's things you would never see unless Terry brought them in. And he grows Draculas, Masdevallias, pleurothalids, all kinds of little weirdo orchids that are great. And I was talking to him last night and he told me, you know how we all each have our own inner orchid snob to some extent? Like, I'm like, I hate Phalaenopsis orchids. They're peasant orchids. Well, Terry's like, he said his inner orchid snob was, if a pollinator doesn't recognize it, then it's not real. So he only grows species, no crosses for Terry. And I thought that was really funny. But he said that because we all have our little things about orchids. Anyway, we'll talk about Masdevallia care now. I want to break this up into cultural, like where they grow in nature, then potting MASDIES, watering them, and fertilizing them. So I'm going to try to break this into 4 sections, and I'm going to try to be concise. So we'll see how I do. All right, so culturally, Masdevallias come from high altitude places. Therefore, it's cool. It's got lots of pure water. The rainwater up there, I think, is more pure than you would find down at lower elevations. Maybe they're watered by mist. I don't really know. But they do have a very strong need for water that has very low total dissolved solids. So distilled water, osmosis water, reverse osmosis water, whatever. You want really pure water when watering these because when they grow in nature, they're accustomed to very pure water. The Masdevallias and Draculas, I guess, grow in a range from 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And Draculas need to have 60% humidity. They are sensitive to warmth, but the flowers will actually perk back up if you dip them in water, which was a neat thing we learned last month from the AOS judges, that if you have a Dracula orchid, you take it to a show. In an hour, it's going to go from being open and flat to drooping. But if you dip it down in a cup of water, totally submerge it through, I think, osmosis, and pull it out, through osmosis, it will perk back up and be nice. And you can do that a few times until it stops doing that for you. So if you're showing Draculas, that's a nifty trick. Not that I think I'll ever do that, but okay. The medium they need is a neutral pH medium, and they need it to be the same size as the roots. They have really fine roots and they need fine medium. Seedling grade bark is what Terry said he uses. It's imperative that Masdevallias get low light, low wind, and low disturbance because they come from low wind areas. They were described as living at these high altitudes but living lower in the trees. So they get dappled sunlight and they get low disturbance. I think it was said, you know, the occasional frog is going to hop onto the plant and hop off somewhere else, but otherwise they don't get disturbed, so they probably don't like being poked and prodded at, turned around, jostled about. They don't seem to like it. Next, let's see. Masdevallia's growth habit, they grow over a small area. Where bulbophyllums have a long rhizome, and in lay people speak, the rhizome is the bridge between growth. So on a bulbophyllum, you have a bulb and then a long traily bit and then another bulb. That thing between is the rhizome. And Masdevallias have a very short one, so they don't meander all over a tree branch and spread out. They tend to grow in a really compact way. And you can see that on this little Masdevallia. I have all the growths are small and they're all centered in one little teeny area in the pot, even though the leaves spread out. They tend to grow in a small region and have compact growth habit, I think is how you describe it. And it was suggested that when you get a Masdevallia or Dracula, and Terry said this is what he does, study it in the literature and see what that species prefers to grow in, temperature-wise, light-wise, etc. If you look up the cultural needs for your specific orchid, and this goes for many orchids, you will be able to take care of it better. So definitely check what kind of Masdevallia you have. Some are more light tolerant than others, some are more heat tolerant than others, some are more cool growing than others, and you should definitely know that before you try to grow it. But again, that's true with lots of orchids. I just think Masdevallias and Draculas are a little bit pickier than every orchid you'd pick up at Trader Joe's, for example. Let's talk potting. Like I said, they have fine roots, so they need a really fine medium, and we'll take seedling grade bark. We talked about using orchiata bark, and lately in meetings we've been saying orchiata bark is kind of acidic, and orchiata bark might break down a little bit and get more acidic over time. But you can combat this by using a 50-50 bark perlite mixture. People in my society said that tends to neutralize the pH and provide good drainage, and they said that it works for Masdevallias and Draculas. So there's that. These orchids like to be really firm and stable where they're growing. Any movement is going to probably break new roots forming, and they don't like that. And transplanting hurts them, especially when you're transplanting, pulling all the pot moss out and breaking all the roots off. You're going to have one sad little Masdevallia or Dracula orchid when you do that. So breaking the roots, hurting the roots, they'll like it. They'll like it. And one thing you can do that Terry really strongly advocates and got me to start doing by telling me about it is using a rhizome clip. Now this is obviously not a Masdevallia, it's a Cattleya. But as you can see here, I have put a hole here and a hole on the other side in the side of the pot. And I put this wire through here, and I've put it over the rhizome. You see that? Or rhizome. I don't know how it's pronounced. I say rhizome. You know what I mean. Anyway, this holds the plant really securely in place. Look, it doesn't really have a lot of wiggle to it. I can almost pick the pot up by this growth because the plant is so firmly secured down. And you can do this with Masdevallias also. You push them against the media. Now Terry uses a rhizome clip that like hooks over the side of the pot and is joined like this and clips around. I don't find that that works for me very well, so I drill holes in the side of the pot. But figure out what works for you. Now if you did that with the Masdevallia, you'd probably place the clip somewhere between here and just put it down and have it so it's holding this steady. Terry said that will make it root instantly, and he grows orchids well, so I'm going to take his word for it. He knows what he's talking about. Now we're talking about, let's see, what type of media. Moss was described as being fail-proof for growing Masdevallias. Noobs use moss. Moss will last you 9 months to a year and a half, but it breaks down really quickly because it's moss, and so it will acidify and get bad. Terry said if you can smell the moss, it's bad, you need to change it. End of story. So yeah, you can use moss with Masdevallias and Draculas, they do well in it, but but it tends to break down quickly and acidify. And also, when you're unpotting this orchid, getting moss out from between these delicate fine roots is hard. You break a lot of roots, then you get a pouty plant. So there's that. You can also mount these guys. Mounting is based on the growth habit of your particular Dracula. Bigger or Masdevallia, whichever of the two genera I'm talking about today. Bigger ones prefer the structure of a pot, whereas littler ones might want to be mounted so they get more air to the roots, and they look so cute on a mount. I know I just talked a bunch of shit about mounting though. Let's see. I got all my notes organized. Some of these guys won't show their blooms well unless they're mounted, because you'll get a Masdevallia that blooms out of the side, and the blooms all come right out here and they hang down. And then you won't be able to see them if they're in a pot. If they're hanging up high, maybe you can see them, but in a mount you get a really nice bloom display on these guys. So sometimes mounting them can be wonderful. And of course, if you have the tolerance to water mounts all the freaking time, do it, because I think some of these do well. It was pointed out that warmer growing Masdevallias and Draculas will tend to have straighter spikes that come up, so they won't need to be mounted for a good bloom display, but that's something to consider. We also talked about a core mount. I think it's coconut core, that meshy coconutty thing. This was the drawing I made. So some people will take the mount and put a layer of core down, put the plant, a little bit of sphagnum moss, and then another layer of core over it. And they mount this way, and I think that sounds very nice actually for mounting. And they said their Masdevallias do well in it, so might try it. And yes, we talked a little bit about charcoal. I think there is a lot of hand wavy stuff going on. As a chemist, I'm not satisfied with it purifies the soil. I want to know what's going on, what's happening. And from my understanding about activated charcoal is, it absorbs an amount of things and then it's useless after a point. So my understanding, and don't take my word for it, but is if you put charcoal in your potting mix, if you put charcoal in your pot, you put charcoal in your fish tank, it's going to absorb some things. It has good absorptive qualities, so it'll absorb impurities in the water, blah blah, ions, meh. But at a certain point, it's going to be full of stuff, and it can't absorb anything else. So maybe after a few months, it won't be effective in your pot anymore. So I don't know. That said, people said mesquite charcoal for barbecues actually works for potting orchids. So if you want to get some cheap stuff, there's that. And they said that they use 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch charcoal bits when potting orchids, which is cool. Another thing you can use with your Masdevallias is, of course, perlite. And people pointed out that slugs really hate perlite because it cuts their bodies and they don't like it. It's like diatomaceous earth. I can spell it. God help me, I can't say it. So that's what we talked about potting. Now, on to watering. Because they come from high altitudes, they get pure water in their natural habitat. Use only distilled water when watering these guys. They won't like tap water, apparently. We discussed that rainwater is becoming more acidic overall, and that you can adjust the pH using pH adjustment formulas you buy. Now, my question for you other sciencey people out here that are better at growing orchids than me, and that couldn't be answered last night, was how do you adjust the pH of the water? Yeah, I can go buy a formula, but as a chemist, I think I can also just mix something up and make my own thing for way cheaper. That said, I don't know which ions, like chloride, bromide, whatever salt I'm going to use to adjust the pH, whatever acid or base that releases ions into the water that I'm going to use to adjust the pH. Which of these ions in the water are going to affect root growth, are going to affect my orchid's health or not? I don't know, because of course I could put baking soda in the water and adjust the pH so it's neutral, but I don't know how that's going to affect an orchid, so I don't know what to do. Do you guys know how to adjust the pH of the water you use to water your orchids with? Let me know, because buying a pH adjustment formula in a bottle is just like makes me cringe inside as the chemist. I'm just like, no, I won't buy it. I'll do it myself. I'm not a dum-dum. Meh. Not that anyone's a dum-dum. It's just that as a chemist, I would feel like a dum-dum for buying a pH adjustment formula. That's neither here nor there. Another point about Masdevallias is that if it gets too dry, they get crinkly leaves. And someone pointed out that that's because they're respirating more water out than they're drawing in. I thought that was interesting. And the last thing we're going to talk about is fertilizing. Now, Terry said keep the fertilizer low. He said that basically any formulation of stuff that you want to use on Masdevallias, he uses a quarter concentration of it. So he dilutes it down to a quarter concentration. Use a 10-15-15 if you're using regular tap water, and use a 10-5-15 if you're using pure or distilled water. I talked more about that in my video about pH and Australian dendrobiums after Fred Clark came, and you can check that out if you're more curious. And we did talk about fertilizing lightly and often. Terry says he fertilizes really lightly every single day, and he has really good growth. And you can see it in the plants he brings in. They're really, really good. And that's the same thing that Fred Clark said when he came. He said he was like a poinsettia kingpin at one point and had like a third of all poinsettias in the world were his. And they found that when they fertilized all the time in really little amounts rather than weekly or a large amount monthly, that the plants had overall way better growth. And this is a theme I'm seeing a lot that people are saying. So I think that's interesting, and I think that's worth noting, and maybe fertilizing lightly very often is good for orchid growing as well. We talked a little bit about some fish emulsion or kelp stimulants. Again, a quarter of the standard preparation is what was suggested for Masdevallias. And people said that they did it a few times a year. And using a fish emulsion or kelp fertilizer gives trace elements which are lacking in regular fertilizers. So when you fertilize your Draculas, give them a little love, give them a little dead fishy smell in there, and they'll get some trace elements that they like. Thought that was nice. Now, if you use a fish emulsion or kelp fertilizer in moss, it's got all kinds of stuff in it that bacteria like to eat, so they might trigger your moss to break down and acidify more quickly than the moss would otherwise. So that's something to bear in mind there. Let's see what else. That's basically it. We had a few little extra notes at the end that we went around and asked other people in the Orchid Society who grow Masdevallias and Draculas to share. They said using a moss mix in a terracotta pot is good because the clay pot, whatever, helps the roots to stay cool. Some people in my climate put these guys out in unheated greenhouses in the winter to stimulate spiking, but don't allow them to freeze because, yeah, they said that they had some out in the winter in the upper 30s and it killed a lot of them. So they don't like to be too cold, but they do like to be cool to stimulate spike growth. Summers in Oregon, in the Willamette Valley specifically, I would assume, are great for Masdevallias and Draculas because we don't get too hot and we get lots of sunshine. That's good. Some people grow these in cool, humid basements with artificial light. So if you're not in a climate that's nice and cool, maybe grow these guys in your basement. One person said that they put their Masdevallias outside during the hot summer last year. They did really well. They grew really well, but he said he used a shade cloth and the shade cloth was too heavy, so they didn't bloom very well. They didn't bloom at all, I think, some of them. So there's that. Other things to know about how much light your Masdevallia wants. Thin-leaved Masdies want lower light. Thick-leaved Masdies want higher light. I thought that was good to know. And yeah, then we talked about artificial lighting, but I really don't know anything about that. You'll have to ask some other people. But yeah, I just thought that was really great because I've never had like a coherent presentation of information about Masdevallias and Draculas. And I hope in reading through my notes that they came off coherent to you guys, because I want you guys to get the best benefit from, you know, what we talk about in my Orchid Society. And yeah, if you want talks like this, find your local Orchid Society. It's full of lovely people who are big ol' orchid nerds, probably bigger orchid nerds than you. And you can see plants you've never seen before. You can get the chance to get orchids you've never gotten before. And it's basically wonderful. So join your local Orchid Society. It's great. You get good talks like this. And thanks for watching. I want to finish up by saying, again, I have never grown Masdevallias in my life. All this information is me parroting to you what I was told by really skilled Masdevallia growers in my Orchid Society. Okay, have a good one and happy growing. Bye, guys.